Imagine waking up every morning believing World War II is still raging. Imagine hiding in a jungle for not 1 year, not 5 years, but 29 years after the world had already moved on. Cities were rebuilt. Nations became allies. People walked on the moon. Television entered millions of homes. New generations were born. Yet on a tiny Philippine island, one man continued to fight a war that had officially ended decades earlier. He hunted for food, dodged search parties, exchanged gunfire with local police, and ignored thousands of leaflets announcing Japan's surrender. He believed every message was enemy propaganda. His name was Second Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda. To some, he was the last loyal soldier of Imperial Japan. To others, he was a tragic victim of military indoctrination. This is the unbelievable true story of the man who refused to surrender. Until the officer who gave him his orders returned nearly 30 years later to release him from duty. Japan's final years of war. By the early 1940s, Japan had become one of the most powerful military nations in Asia. Its empire stretched across vast territories, from China to Southeast Asia and numerous Pacific islands. But after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States entered World War II. What followed was a brutal conflict across the Pacific. American forces slowly pushed Japanese troops back island by island. Every defeat brought the Allies closer to Japan itself. The Japanese military knew they were losing territory rapidly, but surrender was considered unthinkable. Honor was everything. Japanese soldiers were taught from the first day of training that capture was worse than death. Many were expected to fight until their final breath. Others were ordered to disappear into jungles and mountains, continuing resistance for as long as possible. It was during this desperate period that a young intelligence officer named Hiroo Onoda received orders that would define the rest of his life. Hiroo Onoda was born on March 19, 1922, in Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. Unlike many boys his age, he wasn't interested in becoming a soldier. As a teenager, he worked for a Japanese trading company in China. The experience exposed him to life outside Japan and gave him practical survival skills. But everything changed when Japan expanded its military. In 1942, Onoda was drafted into the Imperial Japanese Army. Unlike ordinary infantry soldiers, he showed intelligence, discipline, and an ability to think independently. His superiors selected him for specialized training. Instead of preparing him for conventional combat, they sent him to the Futamata Intelligence School. There, he learned skills very different from ordinary soldiers. A guerrilla fighter must never surrender. A guerrilla fighter must never commit suicide. Late in 1944, the Pacific War was turning against Japan. American forces were preparing to liberate the Philippines. Japanese commanders desperately needed officers capable of organizing resistance behind enemy lines. Hiroo Onoda received his assignment. Destination: Lubang Island, located west of Luzon in the Philippines. Although small, Lubang had strategic importance. Its airfield and harbor could support Allied operations. Japanese commanders hoped to delay the American advance by destroying these facilities before invasion. Onoda's orders were clear. Destroy the airfield. Destroy the harbor. Conduct guerrilla warfare. Never surrender. Never take your own life. Wait for the return of Japanese forces. These orders would become his life's mission. Chapter 4: Arrival on Lubang Island. When Onoda reached Lubang in December 1944, he immediately faced unexpected problems. The island already contained Japanese soldiers commanded by senior officers. Onoda proposed destroying the airfield before American troops landed. He believed denying the Allies an operational runway would slow their invasion. But local commanders disagreed. They refused to destroy valuable military infrastructure. As a young lieutenant, Onoda had little authority. His recommendations were ignored. Soon afterward, American forces invaded the island. The battle was short but devastating. Superior Allied firepower overwhelmed Japanese defenses. Most Japanese soldiers died during the fighting. Others surrendered. Some committed suicide. Amid the chaos, Onoda escaped into the dense jungle with 3 other soldiers. Their names were Corporal Shoichi Shimada, Private Kinshichi Kozuka, Private Yuichi Akatsu. Together they disappeared into one of the world's thickest tropical forests. They believed reinforcements would arrive soon. They expected to survive for weeks. Instead, they would remain hidden for decades. Chapter 5: Life in the Jungle begins. The jungle became both their prison and their fortress. Towering trees blocked sunlight. Heavy rain soaked everything. Mosquitoes spread disease. Food was scarce. Danger surrounded them every day. The 4 soldiers built hidden shelters using bamboo, leaves, and branches. Smoke from cooking fires could reveal their location, so they often ate food only lightly cooked. Their survival depended on constant movement. They avoided villages. They watched roads from concealed positions. They observed anyone entering the forest. At night they quietly searched for supplies. Rice, salt, tools, clothing. Sometimes they stole cattle from nearby farms. Other times they survived on bananas, coconuts, wild fruits, roots, and jungle plants. Every bullet was precious. Every match mattered. Every mistake could mean death. Despite the hardships, their discipline never weakened. Every morning they inspected their rifles. Every evening they discussed possible American movements. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb used in war on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb destroyed much of Nagasaki. Facing devastating losses and the prospect of further destruction, Japan announced its surrender on August 15, 1945. World War II had come to an end. Across Asia and the Pacific, millions of soldiers laid down their weapons and began returning home. But on Lubang Island, Hiroo Onoda and the 3 men with him knew none of this with certainty. Weeks later, airplanes flew over the island, dropping thousands of leaflets. The papers announced that Japan had surrendered and instructed Japanese soldiers to stop fighting. The 4 men read every word carefully. Instead of believing them, they reached a different conclusion. They thought the leaflets were Allied propaganda designed to lure them out of hiding. Military training had taught them that deception was a common tactic in war. Since they had received no direct order from their commanding officer, Onoda believed his mission remained unchanged. Years of isolation. Months turned into years. The group continued to live deep in the jungle, surviving on coconuts, bananas, wild plants, and occasional livestock taken from nearby farms. Whenever they saw search parties, they assumed Allied forces were still trying to capture them. The outside world continued to change. The United Nations expanded. New nations gained independence. Television spread across the globe. Yet for the men hiding in the forest, time seemed frozen in 1945. Doubt within the group. Not everyone remained convinced forever. Private Yuichi Akatsu gradually began to question whether the war was truly continuing. He wondered why no major battles had reached the island and why the search parties often carried messages instead of attacking. In 1949, after years of uncertainty, Akatsu secretly left the group. 4 months he survived alone before surrendering to Philippine authorities. His return to Japan made international headlines. The Japanese government now knew that at least some soldiers were still hiding on Lubang Island. Officials organized new missions to persuade the remaining men to surrender. More messages from home. Search teams arrived carrying loudspeakers. They called out the names of the missing soldiers. They brought family photographs. Letters from parents and relatives were read aloud. Fresh newspapers and magazines were left in the forest. Some even contained recent dates and photographs from post-war Japan. To many people, this evidence would have been convincing. But Onoda remained skeptical. He believed the material had been carefully fabricated as part of an elaborate psychological operation. Because his original orders had stated that only his commanding officer could relieve him of duty, he refused to surrender based solely on written messages or broadcasts. A changing world.